Hi everyone, my name is Reem Caslin. I'm the president of the Muslim Graduate Student Association, and I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I know this is a stressful time for everybody, and just showing your solidarity and coming to get educated is the first step to actually doing something, so thank you.
All right, my name is Layla Koja. I am a student at the School of Public Health. We're really honored today to have Rana Elmir, who's the Deputy Director of the ACLU. She's a Michigan native, graduated from Wayne State, and I think that's it for introduction, so we can get this event started.
Thank you both. Thank you both for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. This is an important moment, I think, for everyone, Muslims and allies alike. And so I kind of want to give you a little bit of a lay of what I'm, kind of the blueprint for what I'm going to talk about today. And I want to leave as much time for questions and answers as possible. I am going to say I'm not an attorney, and even if I were, I would not be able to give you specific legal advice for anything you may be going through right now with regards to the ban or otherwise. I will say that if you are specifically impacted by the ban, if you have questions about, and I'm going to go through some of this to give you some answers, but if you have specific questions about your situation, I want you to take down this email address. It's crisis@michiganimmigrant.org. Apparently at the ACLU, we don't mince words. It is a crisis. This is an intake email in which the ACLU and the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center has partnered. And what we've done is we've gotten quite a few volunteer attorneys, immigration attorneys and others, who are willing to help people who are impacted by the ban. And they're doing this pro bono, which means free to you, to give you advice, to get you out of detention. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Or if you have loved ones who are stranded in other countries, to see what we can do to get them back into the US. And so I want to start by saying that I said this is a really important moment for us, but it isn't the only moment that we've had as Muslims. Oftentimes, we think about anti-Muslim discrimination as starting this election. Or maybe we say that it started not on election day, but it started during the election at some point in the year and a half or 2 years that we were dealing with it and hearing all this rhetoric. Some of us seem to think that maybe it started with the Obama administration and some of the programs that they put in place that affected our rights and impacted our communities, targeted us for surveillance, whether it was CVE, which I may talk about later if we have time, or just blanket surveillance of our communities. And then there are those of us who say that anti-Muslim discrimination started on 9/11. None of those are true. Anti-Muslim discrimination has been a part of American history for as long as Muslims have been in this country, and Muslims have been in this country before this was the United States of America. So I want to start with that. But what's different about it, and it is different, it feels different. How many of you think this feels different? Okay. This feels different because there were some niceties involved in the Bush administration abuses. We all remember President Bush's speech about how we're not at war with Islam, right? You all remember that? Yeah. The policies said otherwise, right? The laws said otherwise. The projects and programs that were put in place said otherwise. Torture, CIA black sites, surveillance, all of that said different. Deportations, the NSEERS program, which was a Muslim registration, all of those things said different. The Obama administration, CVE, again, surveillance. Many of the same programs that the Bush administration put in place were continued into the Obama administration. Yet, President Obama spoke at mosques. He talked about the worth and value of American Muslims. So what happens when you don't see any value in American Muslims? What happens when you devalue them? You don't see their worth, and you move forward and put in policies and practices in place that show that you devalue this community. Well, that's what you have now with this Muslim ban. And certainly it doesn't affect just Muslims, but that's clearly the intended target. And so as we move through this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the ban is. And the reason I want to go through this, I know it's been a few days and you probably all have been consuming a lot of news and you think you have it all down pat. The issue is there's been a lot of misinformation out there, and there's also been a lot of clarification because the confusion of the Trump administration, the lack of preparedness really kind of knows no bounds, and it was seen on Saturday, well, Friday and into Saturday, as we were all trying to grapple with what this really means, who it really impacts. And then the Bush administration, or I'm sorry, the Trump administration has been clarifying things as the days move forward. So I want to give you the lay of the land. I want to talk to you a little bit about the judicial orders that have come out, what you can do with those judicial orders, what they mean for you and other impacted individuals. And then we're going to talk a little bit about rights. I wish I could talk more about rights at the airport, but unfortunately it's a small body of law. And then, but you do have rights. And then I want to open it up for questions, including any questions you may have about, like I said, CVE, as well as the NCERS program, the Muslim Registry. So we know by now that there are 7 countries. Yep.
Sorry, could you speak up? We're having trouble hearing you.
All right, I'll do my best. You got it. So there are 7 countries. Is that better?
There's a microphone on the podium.
Oh, perfect. How does it work? Put it on. Give it a whirl. Is that better? No? 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 No?
If you hold it close to your mouth.
Can you hear me now? Is that all? Hello? Oh, it says the battery is dead or dying.
Check in the drawer. Or in the drawer. Yeah.
There's batteries.
Yes. The batteries are
Oh.
While we're doing this, there's empty seats. Raise your hand if you're buying an empty seat. Please do sit. You don't have to sit on the ground.
Okay, it works. All right, can everybody hear me now? Much better, I hope?
All right. I think it's better if you hold it closer to your mouth.
All right, a bit. Yeah, that works. This isn't the first time I've been accused of being a low talker. So we all know by now that there are 7 affected countries that have been arguably banned, that their nationals, non-US citizens, have been banned from the country. Those countries are Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. These are all countries with Muslim majorities. And the ban has a time limit to it. The ban is for 90 days. However, the executive order also says that the ban may be extended at the discretion of the administration. This affects, at this point, visa holders. Except for visa holders who have, which is probably not any person in this room or anyone we know, generally government officials from other countries, representatives of NATO and the UN, and other type of diplomat visas. Anyone here a diplomat? Yeah, okay. So it doesn't affect you. And however, early on, and because of how the executive order was worded, it was very general, it was vague in some places. Many people thought it also impacted lawful permanent residents. These are folks who have green cards. And so early on, lawful permanent residents, green card holders, as well as visa holders were being detained. And so the executive order impacted people who are outside of the US as well as in transit, which meant that quite a few people, CBP says over 100 people were detained because they were in transit. However, I can't tell you whether that figure is correct. I can tell you the Michigan experience, the Michigan ACLU's experience, is we were not able to get any information out of CBP. The media in Michigan was not able to get any information out of CBP. Congressional leaders who we called on were not able to get any information out of CBP. And CBP stands for Customs and Border Protection. And that is incredibly worrisome, because when our law enforcement officials are abusing the rights of individuals, that should not be secret. We should know about that. We should be able to get our attorneys into the airport to help these folks. But because of the lack of information, it's unclear how many people were actually detained early on. Since then, since the first few days, the administration has clarified that lawful permanent residents, green card holders, are not subject to this ban. And in fact, they went so far to say, though, that however, they would still be subject to secondary inspections, meaning as they come into the country, you have to answer your first set of questions about where you were, about questions about your immigration status, and then if they suspect that you are, that they suspect anything or they feel like they have further questioning, they can bring you into a secondary inspection area. And they can hold you in that area even after you've answered their questions, or at least they think they can. And secondary inspection is a pretty scary thing, and it's where a lot of the abuses that CBP promulgates happen in the secondary inspection. But since then, again, started this by saying the Trump administration was pretty confused by its own order, that they have since, as of today, actually as of yesterday, they put out a memo clarifying the legal permanent resident issue. And this is the memo that they put out, and it's titled Authoritative Guidance on Executive Order entitled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. That is, by the way, the name of the executive order. And what it says here is that the executive order does not apply to legal permanent residents, does not apply to green card holders. That green card holders should be able to freely enter the US. Of course, they are still subject to secondary inspections at the discretion of CBP officers. And so what does that mean practically for visa holders? Particularly, we're speaking on a university campus. There are many individuals who have student visas. There are many faculty members who have work visas. And then, of course, there are dependent visas. Those are individuals who are related to or a spouse of the student or the faculty member. So what does that mean for those of you who are in this room, who are in the US right now on these types of visas? That means you should probably not leave the country. It means you should not leave unless you get advice from an attorney. And the reason we're saying this, we're giving this advice, is that the ban itself, the executive order, is, again, pretty vague on whether it affects both people within the US, so visa holders within the US, or visa holders just outside of the country. Again, they have clarified that point, and DHS has said that the executive order only impacts those who have left the country, or who at the time of the executive order were not in the country. So if you have a student visa, it's imperative that you cancel any travel that you may have because it's unlikely that you will be allowed back into the country. And so, in addition to the seven listed countries that are included in the executive order, there's also this language that is pretty, I think, scary. And it says that the executive order also excludes individuals who would place violent ideologies over American law. So, in many ways, this is being interpreted as coded language for Muslims. That even if you don't fall within these 7 countries, you will be caught by this statement that anyone who would place violent ideologies over American law will also be subject to this ban. And that is important because what we're seeing, and we've seen this for a long time, but not in these numbers, is that individuals who are being placed into that secondary inspection are being asked ideological questions. How many times do you pray? What mosque do you go to? What school of thought do you belong to? What sect of Islam? And other questions like that. And what they're, in the opinion of many in the civil rights community, that is trying to gather intelligence around this area. Would you place violent ideologies over American law? And it's unclear what that would mean. It's unclear what you could say to satisfy that or not say to satisfy that, and whether that becomes a catch-all. And so, as we know now, this executive order also creates an exception for Christians and members of minority faiths from the 7 countries. Again, since these are Muslim majority countries, by definition, creating an exception for Christians and minority religions makes this specifically a Muslim ban and makes it specifically unconstitutional. And so the order also requires visa applicants to attend an interview whereby they're vetted and interviewed on the grounds, like I said earlier, on political, cultural, and religious views. And this becomes a problem for some people, particularly if they're in a volatile situation in which there's no way they can get to an in-person interview to be able to get a visa that allows them to come to the US. So while there have been no deportations at this time of individuals who are not already in the airport, there were removals of individuals who were in CBP custody at the time. But in terms of, there were some rumors that all visas had been revoked, and that meant they were going to come in and there was going to be a dragnet in which those who, let's say for instance, have student visas, all would be deported at once. That again, the administration has clarified that if you are in the country and have one of these visas, this ban does not apply to you at this time. And so we believe at the ACLU that this order, as I said earlier, is not only immoral, but it's unconstitutional. Because by barring Muslims from coming into the country, those who can legally, these are people who have been vetted, right? Visa holders. They have been vetted, they have been approved, and they have, in many instances, waited a long time and fought hard to get to the US. That by barring them and only them, the US is favoring Christianity or other religions over Islam, making it unconstitutional. In addition, we believe that this ban violates the Equal Protection Clause, that you can't treat certain people worse than others, particularly if they're a protected class. And so this executive order is the first step, and I'm telling you, it's not going to be the only step, but it's the first step toward carrying out President Trump's campaign threat to ban the admission of Muslims into the United States across the board. And so we have filed several lawsuits, as well as many other organizations who deserve a lot of credit, like CARE and others, have also filed quite a few lawsuits. But I want to talk to you about 4 in particular. And I won't go into details, don't worry. I don't want to bore you. But there are going to be 4 that I want to talk about because I want to talk about the judicial orders that came out. These are all judicial orders that affect the national landscape. They're not just specific to a single plaintiff. And so it's important for all of you, particularly if you have friends or family members who are impacted, to understand what these orders say and don't say, and to also arm ourselves with these orders, particularly if we're traveling. And so many of you probably heard about the judicial order that was put in place at 5 a.m. on Saturday. Or I'm sorry, the lawsuit that was filed at 5 a.m. on Saturday and was later on Saturday, a judicial order was put in place. And this lawsuit won that the ACLU, as well as the National Immigration Law Center, International Refugee Assistance Project, Yale Law School Worker and Immigrants' Rights Advocacy Clinic, as well as the law firm of Kilpatrick Townsend and Stockton, filed along with the ACLU. And so the judicial order that came out, and it was huge, essentially said that the government, think about it, 24 hours after the ban is put in place, a judge says that the government may not remove valid visa or green card holders from the US who have been detained. Unfortunately, this order did not say, it said you couldn't be removed. It did not say that those who are detained had to be released. And so more work had to be done, and habeas petitions, or essentially lawyers had to go into court to say these individuals who are detained must be released. And the judge in this case also has ordered, I said earlier that we couldn't get any information out of Customs and Border Patrol, at least not in Michigan, although others were able to get information. Well, the judge also ordered the Trump administration to share with us, to share publicly, all the names of the individuals who are detained across the country. Again, even though this order was put in place in New York, federal court in New York, it's a nationwide order. Immediately, the Bush administration attorneys said that this only applied to our clients, the 2 men who were involved in the case. We pressed on, and finally, the administration conceded that this was a nationwide order, and it was huge. The second case, and the second order that was put in place was out of Boston. And this order said, not only could you not detain anyone, a green card holder or a visa holder, but it also said that they couldn't be put into secondary screenings unless permitted by law, and there's a narrow exception for when you could be put into that secondary inspection, and that the order said they had to release anyone who was currently detained. Here's the catch, though. This was a huge order. However, the administration will not concede, even though the judge made it very clear that this is nationwide and should impact every single airport in the country. The administration would not concede that this was a nationwide order. The third order, also out of California, said, enjoined the government, basically said to the government, you couldn't remove, detain, or block entry of anyone coming into the country. And this also is a nationwide order. However, again, the administration will not concede that it is enjoined across the country. And so the fourth order that I wanted to mention applied just to Dulles Airport, but that was also huge in the chronology because this judge said you could not deport legal permanent residents, green card holders, at least not in Dulles Airport. And the reason I mention all of these orders is because in reaction to each of these orders, we got more clarification from the administration. So early on, I said that this was a very confusing 48 hours. Believe me, we had no idea what was going on from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. But with these orders, even though the administration won't concede everything, they did change the way they were implementing and executing this order, this executive order based on these judicial orders. And now the last one I want to talk to you about, even though it only pertains to one person, I want to mention it because it's such a huge victory. A judge in California, this is another ACLU case, actually ordered that the government bring back a person that they had deported through this process. And he, I believe, got back today. That is huge, and we hope more of that happens because we know that quite a few people were detained and deported through this process. And on the issue of more information, I want to point out that the ACLU of Michigan, along with ACLU affiliates, ACLU offices across the country today, filed Freedom of Information Act requests of CBP in 18 different localities to compel them to give us more information about how they implemented this executive order. So hopefully we'll have that information soon. So do these orders that we've talked about apply to people who have not arrived yet? They do not. However, once a person arrives at an airport, they are, the CBP or the government is subject to these orders once the person comes into the US. So the administration, though, has gotten a little smart, right? So what have they done? They have gone to airports all across the world and airlines all across the world and said, you cannot allow these folks onto flights. So what that means for us is there are visa holders. These are individuals who, again, were vetted, who are allowed in the country, who are stranded all across the world because the airlines won't allow them to get onto flights to the US. And we know that once they get into the US, they will be subject to these judicial orders, and that would mean they could not be removed in some cases, they can't be, they'd have to be released in other cases, or they couldn't be detained. So it's a really unfortunate, I guess, catch that we're in. And for several days, many individuals, depending on the airline, if it wasn't complying with the US's orders, was still allowing folks to get on flights and get into the US. Unfortunately, we don't know of any airlines at this point that are allowing individuals to actually board flights. And think about that a little bit. How many of you saw the article, I think it was in the Detroit Free Press, of the Sudanese couple? One of them is a doctor in the US, in Michigan, and his wife has been in, I believe, Dubai for several months on a travel visa with their newborn baby. And she is a visa holder and therefore is stranded. However, her visa, her travel visa to Dubai, is going to expire soon. What that means is she's going to have to go to a third country and apply for a visa to get back into Dubai. This is an incredible crisis for folks. What is she to do? And there are so many other stories just like hers. And so, I want to talk a little bit about, give you a little bit of information about what to do if someone's abroad, what to do if you're in the country, and maybe go into a little more information about secondary screenings. So again, the administration said that this does not apply to lawful permanent residents. And I keep repeating that on purpose, because if a person is detained as a lawful permanent resident, we want to hear about that, right? These are individuals who have certain rights, and we want to make sure that they are not needlessly detained. Dual citizens, this is another interesting area, because early on in this executive order, the administration was confused about whether dual citizens, these are individuals who maybe have Canadian citizenship as well as Sudanese citizenship, what to do with those folks. Those folks were also being caught in this and ensnared in this. However, the administration clarified its position days later and said that individuals will be treated based on the travel documents that they're using at the time of entry. So if I am Sudanese, I'm a Sudanese citizen as well as a British citizen, and I am traveling with my British passport, I should not have a problem entering the US. And I say should not in all of these cases because CBP is a law enforcement agency that treats itself like a paramilitary force. It many times asserts that it is above the law and abuses people's rights in ways that is unimaginable across the board. And so the other piece that's important for folks who are abroad is that the US, within the executive order, it gives the authority to the government to grant a waiver of the ban for certain visa holders. Particularly, we're seeing people with family visas, fiance visas, followed to join visas, are able to get these waivers. And in order to get a waiver, individuals have to go to the consulate of the country they're in and ask for this waiver. And they're done on a case-by-case basis. And if you are in the US and you are a visa holder, even if you're a legal permanent resident at this point, but certainly if you're a visa holder, I just want to repeat, stay put. Do cancel any travel you may have. It is unlikely you will be allowed back into the country while the ban is in place, that 90 days, which could be extended. The other point I want to make is for individuals who are not citizens of one of these 7 countries, however, are having a hard time getting into the country or have been removed or have not been allowed on flights, I just want to identify that this individual might actually be on a government watch list. And if you feel that you might be on a watch list, and I want to say that the watch list is so incredibly bloated, there are a lot of innocent people on the government's various watch lists. And if that's the case, I want you to Google ACLU as well as what do I do if I think I'm on a fly list, and you'll get a kind of step-by-step instruction on how to figure that out, as well as how to potentially get yourself off of a watch list. And so I talked a little bit about secondary screenings. Show of hand, how many of you, while traveling, have gone through a secondary screening? They can be pretty scary, right? These folks are intimidating. It's incredibly worrisome. And so Customs, CBP, has the authority to ask you your immigration status. They have the authority to know why you're traveling, and especially when obviously you're entering or even leaving the US. However, if you present a valid passport, you really don't have to answer the secondary screening questions because they cannot, as a US citizen who has a US passport, they cannot prohibit your entry into the US. So while you should answer the questions about where you've been, what you did, the purpose of your trip, if there are questions outside of that, outside of the immigration scope, you can refuse to answer those questions. I will say there are risks to doing that. They don't treat folks very kindly who refuse to answer additional questions. And in fact, you can expect delays, you can expect a lot of heartache if you don't answer additional questions. So I just want to make sure that you know you have the right to refuse those questions. However, there are some risks involved. And I would always suggest that you ask, what will happen if I don't answer your questions? What will happen if I don't give you my phone? What will happen if I don't give you my laptop to search? And as a US citizen, if the questions become intrusive, if they move past the immigration context, you have the right to talk to an attorney before answering any questions. However, for non-citizens and legal permanent residents, there is additional concerns and fewer rights, unfortunately. So CBP, as you know, enforces the law at all of our borders as well as our airports, which are, by the way, also considered ports of entry and borders in some insane sense. And so CBP has the authority. Their job is to determine whether non-US citizens and legal permanent residents have the authority, have the right to enter the country. So that means that we recommend, if you are a legal permanent resident, that you do comply, that you do answer the questions. If you're a non-US visa holder, you could be denied entry into the US simply because you refuse to answer the officer's questions. Officers, however, cannot, for secondary questioning, and by the way, I saw who raised their hand, and I can tell you that probably there's some rights being violated, because CBP does not have the authority to take you to the secondary inspection based on your religion, your race, your national origin, your gender, ethnicity, or political beliefs. They can't do that. They can take you, like I said, there's this narrow set of ways they can take you to secondary inspection, but it can't be based on all of those things, including religion. So if you're told you cannot enter the country, and this is probably not for anyone here, but for family members and others, if you're told you cannot enter the country, if you're told you are being turned away, however you fear torture or persecution, this is the time during the secondary inspection to say that you're an asylum seeker. And I should point out, so citizens can ask for an attorney if those questions are more intrusive. Lawful permanent residents have the right to an attorney in a very narrow sense and only in certain circumstances. So again, these are individuals who are going into detention and who are basically going it alone, answering questions from a law enforcement agency without any support, without any legal advice for the most part. If you're if you're a visa holder selected to further questioning, you can ask to speak to an attorney, but they don't have to comply with your request. So you can see how the spectrum of rights changes from US citizen to legal permanent resident, green card holder, to non-citizen visa holder. Yep.
What's the policy on translators for these cases?
You know, I'm not sure. I would tell you that we would argue that translation should be provided, and I think CBP would say they do their best. But I can check on that and give the answer, a more clear answer to the organizers if you'd like. So what happens if you're told you are under arrest? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to clarify, is the secondary screening anytime you're asked to go to a room? It's like primary screening would be when you're first passing a line. So if you're hitting secondary screening every time, then you're probably on a list. Is it?
Well, if you're not permitted into the country, you're probably on a list. If you're going into secondary screening and detained for long periods of time, you probably are on a list. I'll give you an example. We had a client years ago, Michigan-based OBGYN. Every single time he came into the country, he was detained for hours and hours and hours. He was reading an Arabic language book on the airplane, and they copied every single page in his book, right? So these things have been going on. These abuses that I'm talking to you about, these aren't isolated to this moment in history, right? They've been going on for a long time, and probably many people in this room have faced those types of screenings and that type of questioning. So if you're under arrest, say CBP tells you, we are taking you are now under arrest. And this goes for anyone across the board, across those three areas. You have the right to talk to an attorney once you're under arrest before you answer any additional questions. So there's one thing that's come up for folks. There's actually a Detroit Free Press article. This is something we've actually been watching for many years. and we've filed several lawsuits throughout the country on this issue, and that is technology and cell phone searches. Anyone here have gone through the secondary screening and had them ask you for your phone? Ooh, lucky folks. And so I have to tell you, as I was preparing for this, I thought to myself, what do I tell folks about technology and cell phones? So I'm going to give you like the normal spiel about what your rights are and what the law says, which is, by the way, very contested in this area. And then I'm going to perhaps tell you what immigration attorneys, what kind of advice immigration attorneys give their clients that I think is pretty good advice. So whether you have the right to decline to provide your technology to a CBP officer after they've asked for it. So you're in the secondary screening, they say, do you have a laptop with you? We want to see your phone. We're going to search through it. Well, it's a contested legal issue. Some courts have said they have this right. Some courts have said they don't have this right. Some courts have said they have a partial right. Some other courts have said, no go. But US citizens, like I said before, cannot be denied entry into the United States because they haven't provided their technology for CBP to search. And that is, of course, unless they have a reasonable suspicion that you've done something wrong, which in many cases, they then get to define what that reasonable suspicion is. And so if you don't give them your technology, and for many of us, that means technology that has a password, right? I don't think, there are probably very few people in this room that don't have a password on their phone. So what they'll often do is they'll ask you for your phone, and they'll also ask you for any passwords so that they can get into it. Well, since you can't be denied access to entry to the US because you're a US citizen, you could theoretically say no to this. However, like I said before, there's a risk involved into asserting your right. And that risk could be that there are additional delays, additional headaches, additional questioning, and at times worse. And so that's the search of technology, giving up your password. What about, do they have the authority to copy everything from your phone or laptop? We've heard of cases. There was a few years ago, an imam was entering Canada, coming back from Canada, and they took his laptop, copied all of his sermons, copied all of his files on his laptop, and gave it back to him, right? So can they do that? What do you all think? There's like no hope, huh? You're on yes. What's that?
Is he a U.S. citizen?
Yes. What do you
You
think?
have access, yeah.
All right, you're listening. You could say no, but they'll probably do it anyway. This too is also a contested legal issue. It's still unclear. We're going to have to. There has to be more litigation to make this, to put this on solid footing. What about continued monitoring of your social media? So what if a CBP officer says, "Give us all your passwords for social media because we're going to keep watching you"? What do you all think?
No.
No? Okay. What if you consent to it? Yeah. So this is what's happening. Folks go into the secondary screening. They give their phone up. They give their password up. And then they're asked to sign a document that says that they give CBP the authority. They give CBP the permission to search all of their technologies, social media, and in some cases, do continued monitoring of their social media. We would say the monitoring piece is settled law, that they cannot do that. However, this is not really a choice for folks, right? You're in this situation, you've been detained for a long period of time, you think this is your ticket out of that room if you just give them permission to do that. And so folks sign anything. And I'm telling you today, do not sign that document. Do not sign that document. Again, ask. It's a simple question. What will you do? What will happen if I don't allow you to continue to monitor my social media after I leave this room?
So is that advice just for citizens or legal residents? Is it for everyone? Because essentially you're saying they have the discretion to ask you for anything. If you say no, they have the discretion to send you home.
Yep.
So you're saying you're basically not giving consent at the cost of not entering the country.
Absolutely. You
And
said it
that's
better
the
than
right
I did.
choice.
Can you repeat that?
So she's essentially saying that you're really not giving anybody a choice here. You're essentially saying you either sign this document or we'll send you home. That in many cases that is true. And for U.S. citizens, again, you don't have to do that, but there's a risk involved. There's a risk of greater detention, and in those moments, for anybody who has been in the secondary screening, you want to get out of that room. You no longer want to talk to these people. And you know, just this, one of the situations that happened through this weekend because of the ban was an Iranian green card holder who was subject to a search of his technology, as well as we believe he did sign a document that gave them permission to search his social media. Yeah.
If you let's say that I wouldn't use it. Let's say you want to sign something, but you want to say no, I didn't sign this under duress. Is there like a word you can use for words like that?
So we believe that if you do sign away this right to privacy on technology and social media, we believe that was a coerced situation because you know, you wouldn't do the same thing in another situation. If you weren't in detention for hours, if you didn't have law enforcement agents in front of you, it's unlikely that you would give someone the password to all your social media and the password to your phone, right? So it's a coercive situation, and we understand that. The issue is this is an area of law that needs to be litigated further. You know, like I said earlier, it's quite contested. And however, the ACLU's position on continued monitoring, right? This is after you've left the airport, is that they should not, whether you've signed that document or not, they should not be allowed to do continued monitoring of your social media accounts.
Rana, when people ask questions, can you repeat them into the mic so that
Sure.
the live streamers can hear?
Oh, yep, you got it.
Thanks.
If you refuse to answer questions or give up your phone passwords or whatever, can that alone put you on a watch list for future travel?
It shouldn't, but the watch list is quite robust and filled with people who should not be on it.
What was the question?
No, you just told me that I was supposed to be doing that. The question was if I refuse to give them passwords or answer their questions, can that alone put me on a watch list?
Okay, so you've mentioned a lot about the four lawsuits or judicial orders that were made by different states. Mm-hmm. Would these the ways that this executive order is affecting people be state by state in any way? Like, are there state-specific lawsuits or orders that people may need to be aware of? And how can they access that?
There are orders that are specific to individual. So the question was, are there individual states or individual lawsuits that impact people differently in individual states that the lawsuits were filed in? And the answer is that there are orders that I didn't list that are specific to an individual client or a plaintiff, not necessarily the state. However, because of these orders that are nationwide that really, address the issue from beginning to end, it wouldn't be necessary. And the other issue that we have is because people are not allowed onto their flights, therefore they're not coming into detention. So for a while, because of the Boston order, a lot of people were being allowed in through Boston, right? However, that has went to a trickle and then completely stopped. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question from the live stream. Do any of the court orders require that the detained are given access to lawyers, and were they obeyed?
None of the orders at this point include access to lawyers. Did everybody in the back hear that one? No? Okay, so the question was, do any of the lawsuits address access to counsel during detention? So the first lawsuit that I mentioned, Darwish, the one in New York, that one, attorneys for the ACLU and others are pressing the issue, but the order does not address access to counsel itself. The ACLU of California filed a separate lawsuit on the issue of access to counsel. However, that has not been adjudicated yet.
What would you say for U.S. Muslims who are U.S. citizens and have never been citizens of anywhere else but the United States about international travel? Is even that kind of like dangerous right now?
You should be able to travel freely and without incident. And I should also say, so the question was, this is going to be a problem for me, I'm sorry. So the question was for American Muslims who are US citizens who are not citizens of any other country, should international travel be an issue for them? And the answer is no, it should not be an issue. As a US citizen, you should be able to travel freely. You should be able to, you cannot be denied entry into the US. However, you know, the abuses of CBP really know no bounds. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of a woman. She is, her father is Saudi Arabian, her mother is Jewish, and because of her name and because of her proximity to two men on an airplane who had brown skin, she was pulled off the airplane, detained for 4 hours, strip and cavity searched. She's a US citizen, right? So I can tell you, you should not have problems. And she wasn't even traveling internationally. She was traveling domestically. However, we know that Muslims have been targets of discrimination at the airport for many years, and many individuals have dealt with problems. However, as a US citizen, you also should not have problems with domestic travel. Back there?
So for those who are now citizens, but who are only recently citizens, say in the last 10 years, that are on that list, from countries on that list, would you suggest that they not leave the country or try to come back into the country, despite the fact that they are citizens, but because they were not always citizens here? Does that make sense? So like, Vice Premier's father was an immigrant, became a citizen recently. You should probably not leave or come back.
So the question is, for individuals who are US citizens, however, perhaps new citizens in the last 10 years, what would the advice be for international travel for them? They are a US citizen. It doesn't matter if you became a US citizen on Friday or a US citizen 65 years ago, or you were born in this country, you have the same right as a US citizen. Again, that should, I can't say that he will not be treated in various ways that, again, many Muslim Americans are treated at the airport and through ports of entry, but he should be able to travel freely.
What is the likelihood of more Muslim countries being added to the immigration ban? Should Muslims not from one of the 7 countries currently banned also consider delaying any travel plans?
So the question was, what about Muslims, or what about individuals who are citizens of one of the other countries and are visa holders, or countries that are not on the banned list, the 7 countries that I mentioned earlier? So for instance, I'm from Lebanon, or I came to the US from Lebanon. Lebanon is not currently on the list. And so what is the likelihood that countries that are not, or additional countries will be added? And what is the advice to individuals who are from one of those other countries and who are visa holders for international travel? So I don't have a crystal ball, is the answer. I wish I did. I wish I did probably last Thursday, and I could have told you what would have happened with this executive order. It's unclear. The executive order does very clearly state that additional countries may be included. There was a little bit of panic I think yesterday There's a little bit of panic when a message began going viral on Muslim listservs, Arab American listservs, that said 7 or 8 additional countries were going to be added. They were Lebanon, Jordan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Southern Philippines, Colombia, Venezuela, and maybe 1 or 2 more. And the administration came out very strongly today and said there are no immediate plans to add those countries to the list, and asked civil rights organizations and immigration organizations to pass the message on to ease the hysteria. But I can't. I can't predict this. They did say they may add additional countries, so what I would suggest, and my advice to those who are visa holders who are from other countries, I would suggest they speak to an immigration attorney and ask that question and get the best advice. Let me take one from here, and I'll go back to you. Yes, sir.
Is it possible for those who are inside the United States to apply for extension of visa, or to apply for OPT or CPT courses?
Okay, so I want to start by saying I'm not an immigration attorney. There are some visas in which you have to leave the country to apply for an extension before you come back to the country while it's being considered. And in those situations, what I would suggest, and when I talk about visa holders should not leave the country or they will not be allowed back in, I want to state very clearly, I'm not suggesting that anyone overstay their visa. I would suggest very clearly and openly that you speak to an immigration attorney who can give you the best advice in that situation. And in case it wasn't clear for those on the live stream, that question was about, is there any way for visa holders to get an extension of their visa in the country, in the US? And again, I would say you should speak to an immigration attorney about that. Let me go over here.
Can you talk about refugees and the implications for current and future resettlement?
Absolutely. So the question is, can I talk about refugees and the implications for current and future resettlement? Right now, this ban, which I spoke a lot about the travel ban, I didn't mention, and I apologize for doing that, I didn't mention that there's also an indefinite ban on all Syrian refugees. So there isn't a timetable for this. What that means is, at this point, the U.S. will not resettle additional Syrian refugees. We know that I believe 61 refugees who had been cleared to come to the U.S., I believe through Michigan, were turned away, and they are not able to come into the country. I've talked a lot about the lawsuits related to the travel ban. I can tell you there are going to be lawsuits related to the refugee ban. I promise that.
So in the beginning you were saying in the executive order there are claims that if you're from another country and you satisfy some criteria, you may be turned down. You might be asked to leave or turned back to. So when it comes to ideas, especially with something like social media, what constitutes, what fulfills those criteria? Is criticizing the current administration, for example, over the ban considered, in violent ideas on the current law, on the next law?
Yeah. So the question was, earlier I said that the executive order says that individuals will be excluded if they would place violent ideologies over American law. And there's, by the way, a lot more to that. I'm just kind of encapsulating that part of it. And the question was, what will get someone to fulfill that criteria and be turned away? And your guess is as good as mine is the answer. I will say, just going back very quickly to the cell phone searches, I had mentioned that I was going to give you advice that immigration attorneys give their clients on the issue of cell phone searches. And one immigration attorney I know tells clients who are traveling internationally, particularly from Muslim majority countries, to travel with a different cell phone, to leave the cell phone that you use. You're going to have to get an international plan anyway. So to leave that cell phone at home. Some immigration attorneys will tell you to delete apps and email, things like that. I will say CBP does have the capability. Their forensic analysis of your phone will detect deleted apps and emails and things like that. But that also means that they have to take you all the way to a forensic search as opposed to just a cursory search where some guy in the back is going through your things. And so those are just two pieces of advice. Someone else said, I don't know if this would get you in trouble. I don't know if there are any attorneys in the room, but someone else suggested to me earlier today that if you're traveling with a U.S. citizen, you make them hold all your technology. So I'll leave it at that. I'll let you decide which one of these tactics you want to take. Yes.
They can keep your laptops, right? Be returned at a future date or something.
Yeah, they can. So the question was, can they keep your laptops and return them at a later date? They do believe they have the right to confiscate your technology and give it back to you at a later date. They often will do this because they want to do forensic screening or copy your hard drive or your files. That is a situation, and actually any of these situations, if your cell phone or laptop is searched and files are copied, please contact the ACLU. I mentioned that this is contested law. Well, we want to contest it even further and make it solid law. So if that does happen to you, please contact the ACLU. We'd love to help.
So could you speak a little bit more about the interview requirements and how they're different, or if they're any different from before?
So the question is, can I speak to the interview requirements and whether they're different than before? I can tell you anecdotally that we've heard about ideological questioning at the border as well as at the airport for many years now. I'm not sure if perhaps that was the exception, not the rule, and now it's perhaps more of the rule than the exception. But we're hearing a lot more of it through this process of the travel ban.
So I was just wondering though, I mean, does this order say that all visa applicants now have to get an interview?
Yes.
Because there were some visa applicants, like for tourist visa, for example, who didn't need an interview. So now all of them will have to go through an interview. And so, well, is stuff that they will be questioned on? Is there any directives about this, or it's just up in the air?
I think it may be up in the air. I'm not familiar with it, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. Yeah. And so the question was about the interviews of visa applicants. So I misunderstood the question earlier, and whether there are new types of questions that will be asked. I will say that executive order specifically says that the interviews could include questions about political affiliation, religious affiliation, and cultural views and affiliations.
And would they have the ability to deny somebody a visa just on answers that they give just on those?
Yeah, so the question is, can the U.S. deny a visa for someone based on the way they've answered those questions? And the answer is they have broad discretion in who they let into the country.
Yeah, I know you said you had trouble getting info from CBP, but do you have any update on, or any info on what's going on at DTW, if there have been detentions, deportations?
So that's who we, so the question was whether we have any info on what's going on at DTW, that's Detroit Metro Airport, and whether there were any detentions there. So we would have to get that information from CBP, and we're still in the same place that we were in. We are relying on individual attorneys and family members who could get to an attorney, who would then in turn come to us. And I want to point out, we've talked a lot about this as a travel ban, we've talked a lot about this as a Muslim ban, but we also have to think about, I'm sure many of you in this room even if you're not from one of the countries that are on the list, even if you're a US citizen, there's a lot of fear and anxiety you're feeling. And that is what the purpose of this ban is, right? It's not just about the travel. It's about creating this anxiety and fear in all of us and othering our community in ways that further, I think, subjugates us, that further targets us. And so I know we talk about it as a travel ban, but really this is about broad-based discrimination against Muslims who are now not free to move about, who, you know, we talked most extensively about laptop and cell phone searches and what you say on social media, right? So this means there's going to be an entire community of people, whether you're from one of these countries or not, who may be less likely, or maybe you think twice about what you post on social media, whether you're critical of this policy or that policy. And that's what this ban is about. Let's not focus on just the travel piece, but let's also focus on what this has done to an entire community outside of just the 7 countries. This is much bigger than that.
Is it ban affecting the process of naturalization or getting rid of the condition on a green card?
So the question is whether this ban has affected the process for naturalization or green card applications. The short answer is that the administration, Department of Homeland Security, says no, that it's moving forward as planned. But I don't think we'll know how that shakes out until, you know, a few months down the road, and we see whether naturalization or green card applications have been slowed down.
As someone who's just like traveling, what can I do if I notice that somebody else, possibly like if they needed a translator or something else, like legally, what am I capable of doing without getting into any sort of trouble if I wanted to translate or like provide them with information about their rights? Just like, could you speak briefly on like what our capabilities are right now?
Sure. So the question is, if you are at the airport and you see someone who's perhaps having a little trouble with TSA or CBP, and maybe they need a translator, maybe you want to give them additional information about their rights, what are your rights to do that? So I'm going to tell you what the ACLU thinks, and then I'm going to tell you what CBP thinks, and then you could make a decision based on that information. So we at the ACLU believe that you have the right to photograph and videotape police interactions, whether that's federal law enforcement or local police. CBP is one of the agencies that is fighting us on this hook, line, and sinker. They do not want you to be able to videotape their abuses. And this is perhaps less of a problem at the airport. You know, people get ushered off into a room. You're probably never going to see, you're not going to see what the interaction is going to be. You're not going to see what the abuses that take place. It's very isolated. But CBP is more interested in not having people videotape and photograph them at the border, where, particularly the southern border, where they're really, there's lawlessness amongst the agency. And so we call it CBP Unleashed, because they're you know, as I said, the abuses of power are great. And so so I would say you have the right to videotape and photograph. There is risk involved, right, in any of these situations. You have the right to, if you're not interfering in an investigation, you have the right to ask if the person needs assistance, or ask the agent or officer if they need translation help. But once told to kind of move on, you can observe. You have the right to observe, as you have the right to videotape and photograph. But I would suggest not interfering any further than that.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask your advice about
sort of refocusing on the most vulnerable of people, so the people that are, our students that are specifically from those countries. What would be your advice in working with them and supporting them? What would we ask the administration if they do reach out and decide to, ask us, what do your students need? What would your advice be?
So the question was, how do we support students who are visa holders from one of these 7 countries, and what could some of our asks be of the administration? I think a big one would be that there's some sort of pro bono counsel, either through an immigration clinic or some other type of support that the university can help students figure out their status and figure out what they should do if their visa is expiring soon. That the university can go a long way in supporting students that way. And I actually think your university is fairly supportive in that way and might be receptive to that. But that's one piece of it. And I think I'd leave it there. I think that's the big one, is making sure that these students have legal representation so that they're not going it alone, trying to figure out what to do, or overseeing their visa and getting themselves in a situation where they're deported and can't come back in for a lengthy period of time.
I have 2 questions. So the first one is, I work with middle school students, and some of them are refugees and they've been worried about being deported. And I saw this list that says there's nothing about deportation, so is that like a fact that I can tell them, you don't have to worry about this, you're safe here now, like they can't do anything about that? And then my second question is, are immigrants that are now U.S. citizens but not U.S. born considered as citizens or immigrants with this executive order?
So I'll start with the second one. And that is, are U.S. citizens who are not born in the U.S. Considered immigrants or considered impacted by this order, or are they considered U.S. citizens? Unequivocally, they are considered U.S. citizens. As I said before, it doesn't matter if you came to the U.S. and became a citizen last week, or you were born here, they cannot revoke your citizenship. And the second question was about refugees, that there's fears amongst middle school students that the student works with that they may be deported. At this point, the administration says, and we can only take them at their word, that this affects individuals who are outside of the country, not individuals who are in the country. So the suggestion I have would be that if they are not a citizen or a green card holder, that they do not leave the country during this period of time. And if their visa or whatever it may be is expiring, that they speak to an attorney as soon as possible.
I've heard reports that some DHS agents have disregarded the stays issued on the EO. Is there any truth to that, and what recourse is there if DHS chooses to disregard the judiciary?
So the question is, there have been reports that some CBP offices, DHS as a whole, has been disregarding judicial orders and have been acting against the judiciary. And so what recourse is there? I can tell you that is true. We have dealt with this across the board. If you think of these judicial orders that I mentioned, particularly the ones that say they very specifically that they're nationwide, and the U.S. is and the administration is not conceding that point and is saying it only affects that one airport, in my opinion, that means they are going against the judicial order. There have been reports of people being detained after the judicial orders, and there were some rumors that, or I guess some reports that individuals were, particularly legal permanent residents, green card holders, were ensnared in this even after the clarification. I can tell you in each of the cases, particularly the ones that ACLU is working on, but all of the cases, the issue of holding this administration accountable for individual CBP officers as well as entire offices who are disregarding the order is very much a part of what they are doing. You know, we believe, for instance, that it is unlawful for CBP to be working with these airlines as well as airports and not allowing visa holders onto flights. So that's going to continue to be, you know, and I should point out these orders are all preliminary, right? The Boston order, I think, expires on the 5th when there's a hearing, and then it may be extended, it may be changed. So these are all preliminary orders. That means these challenges are going to continue, and at some point these judges are going to have final orders that they put into the record.
So this is with regard to the diplomatic visa category. So essentially it's exempt from this order currently. And I guess this is a bit of a crystal ball kind of question. But historically, is it a visa category that has been safe from, you know, all of like the machinations of the past, let's say? And is there an expectation that it will be a significantly safer category even for countries that face the ban?
That's a really good question, and I can't answer it. You know, I don't know historically. I would imagine yes, based on just our relationships with various countries. In terms of into the future, how this changes, I don't know. I will say a point that has come up quite a bit, especially on social media and in the news media, is why aren't other countries on the list, right? And they then name a bunch of countries, which I'm not going to do. I want to point out that I find that to be incredibly unproductive to this whole issue. Not that they don't have these ideas, right? But we don't want to give them any more ideas. But it's unproductive because our work should be to dismantle this ban, not to add more countries, or even if they don't add more countries, criminalize these people, particularly Saudi Arabia, criminalizing Saudi people by suggesting that they should be on this travel ban is incredibly counterproductive and counterintuitive to our movement to dismantle the ban as a whole.
I'm not a lawyer, but I work for an immigration attorney. As you can imagine, we have a lot of panicked clients at the moment, beneficiaries. One of the things that we see, for instance, is people wonder if even for like domestic flights and things, that whether they would be, if they're traveling under visas, they're going to countries, would they be subject to any point of contact with the CBP or be in any trouble. I mean, it sounds absurd, but like I came across a question like this that actually was a Saudi citizen, and of course, since it's not affected by it, I was wondering, in the case of domestic flights, do you anticipate there'd be any trouble?
So the question is, in the case of domestic flights, should there be any trouble? He mentioned that he's hearing from individuals who are either from the impacted countries or outside of the impacted countries that they're worried about domestic travel. And the short answer is they should not be. They should not be subjected to this type of treatment or to the ban as a whole. And I say that, and I'll cite the fact that the administration and DHS has clarified that point and specifically said that this is about folks that are outside of the country trying to come in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, like you were saying, with application interviews and with screenings, it all comes down to the discretion of the officer who's there. Is there any auditory process for all of that? Like, who gets to see what happened in that room to see whether or not, or to make any judgment on whether or not it's a fair thing to do?
So the question is, how are individual CBP officers held accountable? Would that be a good question? To their superiors, particularly when there are abuses. And there is a grievance process that you could file a complaint with the agency if you're subjected to a search or subjected to treatment that you find intrusive, if you feel that your rights have been violated. I will say from experience that CBP in particular is a law enforcement agency that is incredibly corrupt across the board, and not necessarily individuals, right? Not individual officers, but there's this notion that they're a paramilitary organization means that they have a different thinking about policing than your average law enforcement agency. And so what I would suggest is holding CBP accountable through external forces like organizations like CARE and ACLU and ADC and others like that.
So, but like, let's say you were to go through CARE or something, like, is there any, does CBP have any obligation to release, like a video of what happened? Is there any sort of obligation like that? Or is there any external force that has access to that?
So that's why. So the question is, is CBP obligated to share information, including videos of incidents and other types of documentation? And the short answer is absolutely, in particular because of the Freedom of Information Act. And that is what's so important about what we filed today across the country. 50 ACLU offices filed these types of requests for information for 18 different airports and 18 different CBP offices. There are multiple airports in one CBP office. It was just one FOIA. And they're subject to that. I will tell you that often they rarely release information, or I should say often we have to end up suing them to get them to release the information. So right now we have a lawsuit against Customs and Border Protection for not giving us information on internal stops within the state of Michigan. So how many of you saw reports about the 100-mile zone? Okay, so to give you an example, CBP says that it has broad powers within 100 miles of the border. And you heard me earlier say that the airport is considered a port of entry, and therefore it's a border. And so in Michigan, if you think about Michigan, we're surrounded by water, right? These are, so all of Michigan, 100% of Michigan is technically within CBP's 100-mile zone. And CBP says that the authority it has on the border to subject people to warrantless searches, they can do throughout the state. So 2/3 of Americans, this is now the whole country, 2/3 are within a 100-mile zone of an airport or a border. So when I talk about this kind of broad power that CBP thinks it has, that's what I'm talking about, right? And so we filed FOIAs 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, to try to get information out of how they implement this 100-mile zone. What kinds of detentions do they do internally, not right on the border, or what you and I would think is the border, right? Like maybe the Windsor crossing, the tunnel of the bridge, but just throughout the state, what kind of detentions, what kind of trainings do they do? And they gave us a little bit of information, but they didn't give us everything. And then they dragged their feet and dragged their feet and dragged their feet. So we're currently in litigation against CBP to try to get more information, because in order to hold them accountable for abuses, we need to know what those abuses are. We have theories, we think we know, we have anecdotal evidence that these abuses happen, but we need to know from them, through their data, where they're going wrong.
Is it likely the ban will be struck down before the 90 days are up? And does the refugee ban violate the Geneva Convention?
One by one.
I know, I'm two.
Okay, so the question is, does the refugee ban violate the Geneva Convention? I believe that is a resounding yes, and I believe the UN and other entities have come out saying that. And then the other question was, if you can repeat that.
Oh, sorry. Is it likely the ban will be struck down before the 90 days are up?
Is the ban likely to be struck down before the 90 days is up? We are hoping so. We're hoping that it gets struck down in one form or another, whether it's litigation that we or others file in the coming days, or it's litigation that's already been filed. We hope so, and we believe that these judges, if you see how quickly they're acting, understand that this is an urgent situation. Do you want to go?
Yeah, I have one more
I've missed the live stream.
As long as his/her I-20 is valid, an international student does not have to leave to renew their visa because they don't need a visa once they are inside the U.S. Has this law changed?
So the question was about an I-20 international visa, and I believe the law has not changed. I believe once they're in the country, they should be able to stay. I would ask an immigration attorney about whether they should leave and try to come back into the country. I believe they would be subject to the ban upon entry.
Do you have this material available in Arabic?
We at the ACLU, so these materials, one is from, so the question was about whether we have the materials that everybody has at their desk.
I can respond to that, actually. If you go to the Facebook event, there should be a Google document with a ton of like resources, know your rights, and whatever, like etc. in different languages, including Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, Somali, and English, obviously. So yes, the Know Your Rights one while traveling, the clear one in particular, is available in those languages.
And the ACLU has a bunch of Know Your Rights information on their website in various languages. I do want to point out that this document from ADC, this was produced the day after the ban, and so it may still include information that is no longer, or at least the administration says is no longer applicable. So for instance, it says that this ban impacts visa holders and lawful permanent residents. It should not impact lawful permanent residents. And for folks who are traveling, who are lawful permanent residents, I would suggest that individuals take with them, let's see if I still have it, I can't find it, but I would suggest that individuals who are lawful permanent residents travel with the memo I showed you early on. So do a quick Google search, or I can send it to the organizers of this event, and make sure to travel with that. In addition, for those who are trying to come into the country who are not allowed on flights, there is, some have suggested that they try to go to the airports and to the airports with some of these judicial orders in hand. I can tell you it hasn't been working. I've talked to numerous people who have done that at our advice, and the airlines are under strict orders not to allow anyone on flights.
Which memo is this in?
So this is the memo that I was talking about for lawful permanent residents. The title is Authoritative Guidance on Executive Order entitled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, January 27, 2017. It's from Donald McGahn, MCGAHN.
So you've been talking about how sort of CBP or sort of act their own accord. So being optimistic and assuming that this ban gets turned down, should people on F1 visa from Arab countries or Muslim countries expect 4 years of sort of risk, like always uncertain about whether or not they'll be allowed in, or as soon as this ban gets sort of turned down or canceled, will it get better for other people? I know it's a hard question.
So the question is, will Muslims or those from Arab countries who are visa holders, if the ban were to get struck down, will they always have this level of uncertainty and feel as though the other shoe is going to drop? I'll give you a really short answer, and you're going to think that I'm totally dodging this one, but I'm really not. The ACLU is going to try like hell to make sure that doesn't happen.
I mean, when I was a kid, I learned that presidents like sign laws into account, and then the legislators made the law. So I have two questions. First of all, how is this allowed if it's not object to the law? Like, what law is it under? Like, do you think it's under? Second of all, why do you think it's unconstitutional? Like, you know, what percentage do you say like would it be struck? Percentage of chance you say that you think it's struck down?
So the questions were, how certain am I that this law is going to be struck down as unconstitutional? What percentage? I'm going to be really optimistic, and I'm not really known for my optimism. But I think this law is such a blatant abuse of power, and is so incredibly unlawful for a host of reasons. I'm going to say it's pretty certain that this law will be struck down, if not in its entirety, perhaps the most egregious aspects of it. And then the first question you had is, what authority does he have? What authority does the president have to sign executive orders? You know, this one's a hard one, right? Because when we don't like executive orders, we like to say that presidents don't have the authority to sign executive orders, but when they're passing an executive order on DACA and DAPA, we're all about executive orders, right? And so, but we do have the courts, and we have the courts to rein in the president and rein in these executive orders when they're unlawful. And I'll put, you know, I believe in the Constitution, I believe in our courts, and I believe it will get struck down.
But I mean, you say we have the courts to rein in the executive branch from, you know, making executive orders and carrying out actions that are unlawful and that would otherwise never be passed. But you said earlier that they weren't complying with the court orders to release information and to release detainees. So where do we go? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, wow, I didn't realize I was such a downer. So the question was that I've said that I believe in the courts and the Constitution, yet these agencies are complying with court orders. I want to point out that much of the agency is complying with the court order. There are instances in which individuals, or I should say offices, are not complying. And then I should also point out that the administration is clarifying various aspects of it for the better, like the legal permanent resident piece. And so, and I'll also add that the courts aren't done with this yet. These are preliminary injunctions, and we have a long way to go to make sure that this executive order is struck down. Don't lose faith.
My question is regarding the exception about minority religions. I just want to know how strictly they define what a minority religion is, and how can they verify that information of the president?
So it's a very good question. On the issue of minority religions, how is a minority religion defined, and also how do they ensure that those who are claiming that exception are in fact members of that religion? And I think this is where the cynical person in me comes out, because I think you're absolutely, or I should say, I think what you're implying in your question is absolutely right, that there's really no way to identify individuals. So what this travel ban essentially does is it says there are good Sudanese people and there are bad Sudanese people. There are good Somalis and bad Somalis. There are good Syrians and bad Syrians. And all the good is those who are in these, who are Christian or other minority religions that live in these countries. And that's incredibly sad to think in these terms, because these are individuals that live with one another, that are neighbors, and so I don't believe that these minority religions are defined in any way that is concrete. And I will tell you that for the ACLU, particularly as we continue to litigate this issue, the fact that there is this exception for Christianity and minority religions makes it that much more clear that this is discriminatory against Muslims.
I don't know if you can speak to this, but I know that there's a lot of anxiety regarding the fact that Trump promised a lot of orders regarding the Muslim American community in terms of the bans, but also registry, potentially camps. So given that the United States has a history of like a no-fly list, which is essentially a Muslim registry, also has a history of like Japanese internment camps, right? So given that these are enmeshed in our laws, have been allowed to happen, what is the likelihood that those other promises that he made can be pushed forward and be legitimized as constitutional?
So the question was about other campaign promises, such as a registry in camps. What is the likelihood that we'll see these come down, but also the likelihood that they'll be normalized or become constitutionally legitimate? I'll tell you, I'll answer the last one. They will never be constitutionally legitimate because they target one religion, over another. But I want to point out your point that we've done this before is so true. You know, the Muslim registry, how many of you are aware of NSEERS? Yeah, that was a Muslim registry. It was a Muslim registry that was put in place in 2003, affected men and boys from 25 different countries. Only, I think, one country was a non-Muslim majority country. During that period of time, 13,000 people were deported. Not a single conviction, not a single charge, right? Most of these individuals were deported because the registration was so onerous, and the administration, much like this executive order, the Bush administration did not give individuals clear direction on even how to register or where to register. So a lot of the folks that were deported for non-compliance, which is incredibly heartbreaking as families get split up and lives are interrupted. But I will tell you, all of these promises that were made, you know, CVE, for instance, right, countering violent extremism. There's already rumors that the Trump administration is going to rebrand it as countering violent Islamic extremism or countering radical jihadist extremism, something like that. I can't keep up. Like the fact that they haven't even settled on a name just blows my mind. But let's be honest about that, right? So what the administration is saying when it comes to CVE, by changing the name and by focusing it only on Muslims, because that's what they're saying they're going to do, in many ways it's a little more honest than what the Obama administration was doing, even though the Obama administration was also only targeting Muslims for CVE. And in fact, the $10 million grants, there was $10 million in grants that were recently announced. About 30 organizations, universities, and law enforcement agencies split this $10 million, including the Dearborn Police Department, as well as a community organization in Dearborn that actually rejected the $500,000 that they received, thankfully. But what we see of the close to 30 organizations that got CVE money this round, only one of them was a non-Muslim organization. So, you know, if you call it countering radical Islamic extremism, you know, the conflation between Islam and extremism is really dangerous and awful, but at the same time, this is exactly what we've been fighting against for the last 15 years.
So are they, I mean, this might be a little optimistic, but are they essentially shooting themselves in the foot by being more blatant about the fact that this is specifically geared towards targeting and, you know, and making an example out of the Muslim community?
So the question was, are they shooting themselves in the foot because they're very blatantly targeting the Muslim community? And I'll answer that by directing everyone. The ACLU National has a blog, and there's a blog that was, I think, written a couple of days ago that says, here are all the reasons that Trump's executive order is unconstitutional. And part of the blog, and it's a very long blog, but part of the blog is a bulleted list of all of the terrible things President Trump, as well as other individuals in the administration, including Steve Bannon, the chief strategist, have said about Muslims. It's clear they have animus. It's clear that they have a real hatred for Muslims that is driving these policies. And you can call it what you want. You can use this name, but at the end of the day, it's very clear what the agenda is. And on top of that, creating an exception for minority religions is very clear. So I think what you might be asking is a judge going to be able to see right through that? I think absolutely.
But I guess I want to piggyback on that, and like, will they get smarter and like not make it as explicit in terms of excluding certain protected religions? I don't know, so that they can keep pushing this forward without it being unconstitutional.
So the question is, are they
smarter? I mean,
more
strategic? I don't know.
More sly.
Yeah. Evil.
Are they going to get more sly, evil, strategic, smart about this and push policies that perhaps will pass constitutional muster? And I think I'll answer that in a variety of ways. One is the rhetoric, the policy proposals during the campaign, the private as well as public comments that they've made are very clear about what the agenda is. So there's that piece of it. Second is it would make it much harder for them to pass this legislation, I should say legislation, but to pass these measures without some of these exceptions, right? So when the goal is to target the Muslim community, which the reason there's this carve-out, I should say, is specifically because they don't want other communities to come on board. And I think what you've seen in the protests that are happening all over the country is nobody's going to let this go. Anything on the lister?
Yeah, but I'm going to hear it for the last one because it's a positive question and I want to end this on the positive note.
But I said I wasn't known for my optimism.
So we're going to take 2 more questions from the audience, then end on the live stream question.
I know that Iran has decided to eliminate American visas in the dollar. I was wondering, are there any other countries doing reciprocal actions and how that could affect anything?
So the question is, Iran has also restricted U.S. visa holders from entry into Iran, and whether there are other countries who are also doing similar things. I don't know of any.
Iraq or something like that.
What's that?
Iraq.
Oh, Iraq, yeah. Iraq did. Anyone else?
Kuwait.
Kuwait? I thought Kuwait did the opposite.
Well, they were doing something similar to what Trump was doing. They're not US allies, so they're aligned.
Oh, no. What Kuwait did was it banned individuals from a similar list to the 7 countries. Yeah, yeah. So does that make sense? So what Kuwait did is they're a great ally of the Trump administration, and so what they did was they said, this is a really good idea, we have to keep terrorists out, and so we're going to pass our own travel ban. but Iraq and Iran have either put in place or threatened bans on U.S. travel. And in particular, Iraq is important because of the number of U.S. contractors that are in the country. One more question from the audience? If you had one back there, no? Okay. Okay, go for it.
Just really quickly, so we say like leave the country. Now there are certain countries, some I know, but there are certain countries I know that are sort of like part of the United States, but not like, part of the United States, like, certain like outlying countries. Sounds very long, but like being deported out of the country, does that mean like can't leave?
The territories as well?
Territories, yes.
Ooh, I have no idea. That's a good question. I'll look it up and I'll send the answer. I'm not above saying I don't know, by the way. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I don't want to give you any misinformation, and so I'll get back to you on that one.
Rana, can you speak about the list of lawyers and mention that we do have that as a resource?
Okay, so I told you that the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, which is an incredible organization, on Saturday, when we were all fielding dozens and dozens of calls, their attorneys were at the border, the tunnel and the bridge, trying to get information, and in fact, drove with an individual, a visa holder, to make sure he was able to get into the country and helped him through questioning and all of that. They're an incredible organization. Anyways, so they have a list of attorneys throughout the state. It's a pretty comprehensive list that they refer people to. It includes their language skills as well. So I'll point out that these are not necessarily, so this is a compiled list, so if you contact these folks, it's likely that they will charge, right, for their work. But this is, so for folks who have student visas and have questions about how to get it extended or what they should do, all of that, finding an attorney on this list might be helpful. So please take a copy. We have about 50 here. The other option is, if you are specifically impacted by this ban or have specific questions or know folks who are stranded outside of the country, please have them, or you can for them, email this email address. It's crisis@michiganimmigrant.org, and someone will refer the case or the story or the individual to an attorney who has agreed to take these types of cases on a voluntary basis, so that's for free. Okay, uplifting.
What can people who aren't lawyers do to fight this, and how can people, in what ways can non-Muslim people support Muslims or the cause?
All right, so the question is, it's a hard one. So the question is, what can non-lawyers do? So I'm a non-lawyer, so there's a lot that non-lawyers can do. The first thing you can do is, and I know many of your students who maybe you are not from Michigan, maybe you're from more conservative states, maybe you have a Republican representative or senator. It's important that we all, regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat, it's important that we all call our legislators and make sure that they know no ban, no wall. And I want to point out that while we've talked about the travel ban, we also have to come out for one another. This is not just about the Muslim ban. This is about immigration at the border. This is about Black Lives Matter. This is about mass incarceration. This is about reproductive freedom. This is about LGBTQ rights. And so as you've all come out for this today, this teach-in, I hope you will also be going to events about those issues, because if we are going to build a movement against these abuses of power, against injustice wherever it is found, we have to come together and we have to build that movement together across cultures, across ideals, across religion, whatever it may be. So I hope that when you think about what it means to show up and what it means to help in this context, that you're thinking about other communities who are similarly situated and who are coming out for you as well. And then what can non-Muslims do for Muslims? You know, this is a tough one for me, and this is why it's a tough one for me. I have been asked this question quite a bit, and I've been like looking for the Allies guide that gives a good answer to this. And most of the Allies guides, they have really good information, right? Nothing about us without us. I think that's a pretty good, maybe Muslims should lead on these issues, things like that, right? But in terms of concrete things, I think we should, the congressional leadership on this issue to stop this administration from executing on its most egregious campaign promises is really, really important. Protests are really important. I think going to trainings like bystander training, hate crimes we know were up during this election, and going to things like bystander training, knowing how to intercede if someone is in trouble. Of course, asking permission before you jump in, but all of that is really important. And so one of the things I would do is I don't ever say that I speak for all Muslims, and so if anyone here has any additional comments, what do you need as Muslims or people of color, feel free to, maybe we can end there.
Maybe you can mention some organizations that have been doing work and where people can direct their donations to.
So some of the organizations that I think have been doing incredible work on the issue of the travel ban specifically, as well as CVE and Sears, other types of abuses, I would say CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is always under threat, unfortunately. Other organizations are ADC, the American Anti-Discrimination Committee. There's quite a few youth programs, youth Muslim organizations that are doing incredible work, and particularly in Minneapolis in the Somali community. Those are organizations that need our help, particularly as the federal government targets the Somali community in Minneapolis, especially the youth community, for counter-radicalization efforts. I think devoting time, devoting money to that organization, and then community organizations. An organization right here in Michigan, Access, has a program called Take on Hate. It's an incredible organization, an incredible program, and I hope you'll support it. Of course, the ACLU, but I think we're cool for a little bit. My boss would not like to hear me say that we're cool for a little bit, but I really hope that you would direct your resources to organizations, to Muslim organizations in particular.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. I know it cleared out as the event went on. Special shout out to the AMAS Department, Arab and Muslim American Studies Department, and the LSA Student Government for co-sponsoring this event.
And shout out to Hafsa, our volunteer in the first overflow room,
Hi, Hafsa.
and Gabby and Molly in the second overflow room. So thanks, guys. Big help. If you need the information about the lawyers, feel free to come up here and get them for either yourself or people you know who are affected. Also, if anyone who is affected needs to rant to someone, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We're here for you guys. All right. Thank you.